Tom Tramantano, lithographer, third class. Graduating high school at 17 years old in New York City, I, as well as any other young man at that time, realized that you're going to be drafted by the time you were 19 and a half. And at 17 and a half, it didn't make sense to sit around, start a job, and work on life for 2 years and then end up being drafted. Had grown up on the water, so it was, I guess you could say it was in my veins. I decided to go into the Navy. I also had a conflict with my father, who insisted that I had to do military time, and was pushing me, and I decided I'd show him. I'd go to the recruiter and just join. Then I had to go home and get his signature anyway. Went in on what was called the Cachet program. I was sworn in August 1st, 1966, went active October 16th of the same year. It was arranged that way so I'd be home for Christmas. After boot camp in the Great Lakes, I went to the Naval Photo Center in Washington, D.C., worked in the maintenance division. While there, studied and was rated as a lithographer. Good advanced best seaman lithographer. There wasn't enough quota to bring more people into the billet. I would say 6 months into my tour there, I was given the opportunity to start selecting my choices for my next duty station. Wanting to be a printer, I put in for a large ship. The first choice was a carrier. And for obvious reasons, the East Coast, be close to home and not near Vietnam. Received orders for, actually found out I received orders when they started to tell me I had to go to sick bay and get all my shots for going overseas. Got my orders for the America, and I was pretty happy I was going to be stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, close to home. And it was shortly thereafter found out the ship was going to Vietnam. Arrived on the ship in February of 1968. Went to, I believe they were coming down here to Mayport, Florida, carrier calls, and a bit of a shakedown. Woke up one morning in the indoctrination division, was told I was going to firefighting in Charleston, South Carolina. And first question was, I guess we're pulling in tomorrow. And it's, no, we'll fly you off. And I was flown off in a cod off the angle deck, which was an experience. Spent the night in San Juan and did 2 weeks firefighting in Charleston, and brought back up to, flown back up to Norfolk, Virginia. And April 10th, 1968, we set out for Vietnam. It was the first half of an around the world cruise. Got to see a lot. As much as I'm proud that I'm a veteran, we were supporting the pilots. The pilots were doing all the work for us. I printed. Our shop ran 24 hours a day. I was on a night shift for the entire cruise. We did Rio de Janeiro, Philippines 3 or 4 times, Hong Kong, Japan. Got the tour up to Tokyo while we were in Japan, and New Zealand and Australia on the way back, and then Rio de Janeiro again. We came back December 16th of that year. Good 10-month cruise around the world. I listened to the young kids in the Navy today complaining about the 6 months that they were away. Quite ironic. Life on board the ship was great for me. We had learned to cope with certain drills in boot camp, where if you were smart enough, you could, in my case, I like to say I detached my mind from my body during certain drills. And I would actually go out to one of the sponsons on the ship and sit down beside a large coil of rope and just sit out there at night and watch the lightning off in the distance and kind of clear your mind and let it go. After 30 or 40 days at seas, and the attitude kind of changes a little bit. We were just reminiscing about it upstairs, how I actually got into a fight at one point, and it was over some silliness, but it was just, we had been out too long, and you feel it. Liberty was good, and I was with some really good people. It made life a lot easier. You do miss home, and at the time, going on board at 19 years old, I'd say after one line period in Vietnam, the average age on board the ship went to about 45. It matured you real quick. But it was an interesting life. I was in a hurry to get home at the end of that 3 years, but I have no regrets for the time I served. I'm not quite sure the exact time frame on when it was, but we were on a high-speed run to get away from it. And I don't really think we saw any rough water to speak of. We did hit a storm. It had to be 2 days out of Norfolk on the way home. Actually, I had gotten called up to the chaplain's office that my grandmother had a stroke, and he sent me to the ham shack to speak to the family at home. He was willing to bump somebody off a plane the next day and fly me home. And I decided to stay with the ship. And coming around Cape Hatteras, we hit a storm. And all the berths on the ship were on fore and aft. So that night you would feel it rocking a little bit sideways, but you never felt the bow come up and down. That night coming around Cape Hatteras, I was trying to sleep and I could feel the bow going up and down. So I stayed up for the night. And there was some damage to the catwalks in the morning from waves, but nothing compared to a young man I spoke to today over in Mayport who was walking around with back injury and waiting to be discharged because he was on a frigate in a hurricane and tossed him across the passageway and snapped his back on him. But I don't think there was any fear in me, but a lot of concern, you know. But I had already been on the ship for 10 months out at sea, so there wasn't much more they could throw at us. So everybody was fine. There was a little damage, but nothing serious. They give you a little bit of a pep talk the last couple of days. I'm sitting in a chair, and the young man in front of me was a data tech, and they offered him $10,000 to re-up. And again, that was 1969. It was an awful lot of money. And as a lithographer, when I sat in that chair, they offered me $1,500 to sign up for 6 years. So that helped to push me out the door. And again, my plan was to go in early, to not start on my future and then be drafted. So I went in early, and here I was. I had actually gotten a cut. I wasn't supposed to get out until February of 1970. But there was a budget cutback, and I was released October 31st, 1969. And I had a job lined up. I was ready to get started with my life, you know, and put the Navy behind me. It wasn't until 1995 it caught up with me. I started all over again. But absolutely no regrets whatsoever.